The moral debts that men incur transcend time. Like an inherited malignant infection, they are visited even upon new generations, ignorant of the cause and unaware of the effect. And until those debts are paid in full, a sickness resides in the soul. Today, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, living in the shadows of Mount Rushmore, there is a man concerned with such a moral debt. Each day he looks upon this stirring statement in stone uttered for the ears of eternity, and he asks, can a blessing rise from the rubble, as this monument implies? Is there sufficient God in us to enable us to meet our moral obligations from one generation to the next? That masses his summers in the informal atmosphere of an Episcopal rest camp, much of which he built with his own hands. He is the Right Reverend Blair Roberts, who with his devoted wife has given a lifetime of service to one of the most challenging missionary districts in the United States. A great Episcopal leader for a generation, an eminently lovable man, a simple and yet profound human being who, like a higher sculptor, has maintained his sense of proportion and design, Bishop Roberts is a symbol in the church of our concern for the afflicted, and his hands and heart are as steady today as when he began his labors as a pioneer priest. But there is a shadow on the land, a stain which manifests itself even on the loveliness of the Black Hills. Truth is beauty, beauty truth, sang the poet. Then how can it be truly Mount Rushmore in the shadow of an ideal? Yes, in the Indian summer of his life, the bishop reviews with the clear convictions of a consecrated man a problem which he and his church have led the way in striving to alleviate. The human problem he must pass on to the next echelon of Christian soldiers. A moral problem which is shared by all men everywhere in the land. In the Indian summer of his life, Bishop Roberts ponders the problem of the Sioux. A century ago, these heroic people possessed the Black Hills, together with that mighty domain stretching from Minnesota to the mountains of the West. Theirs was the warrior culture which blocked the path of westward progress to our young and growing nation. A century ago, the tribe was in full flower. Its small villages were strung like gleaming beads across the plains, transient communities of a migratory people. Whole families moved vast distances with ease, using the horse and the travois to take them and all their worldly goods. The warrior heads of each new family came in peace, bearing the symbol of peace, and so were they received even as brothers among brothers and children to the chief. In the summer of 1875, the western villages of the tribe were at peace. War bonnet and lance slept in the thick sunshine, and time, like the clouds, drifted noiselessly by. The women were in camp, busy with myriad things deeply rooted in the life of the people, things that soothed the eye and warmed the heart. These the women did so that beauty, too, might reside in the austere fabric of their lives. Above all, it was in beadwork that these women excelled. With the instinct for design and the sensitivity to color peculiar to her race, the Sioux squaw took infinite pains to string an exquisite quality about the most common objects of everyday life. The old people and the children also remained in camp, and one old man kept the winter count. This was a history of the people used for the instruction of the young. The buffalo hide were recorded significant events that kept the Sioux in touch with their past and shaped their decisions for the future. But for the Sioux, all decisions past and present were bound up with the buffalo. As they could kill this quarry, so could they live. Its meat sustained them, its hide sheltered them, its very leavings were their source of fuel. The buffalo was life. And of late, before the advance of the white man into their country, the great herds were diminishing. The Sioux, like all who hunt to live, killed only as their needs required. They had singled out a bull who stood guard over his harem. They would have to hit him hard and together in a vital place, with great power behind each arrow, if they hoped to bring him down. The Great Spirit had been with them. Their arrows were true. It was during the cool summer nights that the Great Spirit seemed closest to his people. His presence hovered on the fringe of the campfires, drawn there by the drum of the medicine man, who invoked him to bring his wild and fearful strength to bear, that the stricken might be cured. Even the bravest of warriors trembled at the sound of that drum, for this music awoke the unknown, set the troubled forces of the night to brooding, endowed even dead objects with irresistible power. The Sioux suffered a faith through fear, tormented by the agonies of superstition. And it was on this fear that the medicine man played. This was the instrument whose hollow beat was not merely the sounding of the drum, but really the audible expression of the heart of primitive man trembling beneath the fearful force of darkness. But the Great Spirit cast other kinds of spells, less terrifying but equally disturbing, in the hearts of even the bravest of warriors. The most common of these was that uncommon sensation called love. The Sioux had a traditional form of courtship. It occurred most often at the streams where the gentle sounds of water matched the mood of the moment. The young suitor, so much more skillful in pursuing a buffalo than a bride, generally relied on a more expressive ally than his voice to speak for his heart. She gave no sign of hearing, but she knew her victory was won. Once her suitor paid her parents in horses stolen from another tribe, they would be wed. Seemingly, she heard nothing. Actually, as she walked up the bank, she was planning her trousseau. On the morning of her wedding day, they dressed her in the finery her family had saved across the years for just this moment. They dressed her with exquisite care, with deep joy, for the beauty and the solemnity of the occasion was not lost upon the Sioux. Actually, this girl, through her wedding, would be sentenced to a life at hard labor, for such was the lot of women in the tribe. But on this day, and this day only, she would achieve full stature, and the memory of it would warm her heart in all the remaining time of her life. At the wedding feast, relatives and friends wore their finest eagle feathers, beaded moccasins, and porcupine quill vests. And on such an important social occasion, the food was prepared in a buffalo paunch, which not only held water but contributed its flavor. Red-hot stones were dropped in, bringing the water quickly to a boil and cooking the chunks of meat that were the main course. The quality of the cooking was irresistible to all of the guests, of all ages. Then the women escorted the bride to her husband's teepee, the stately procession of a queen who, in a matter of moments, would become a servant for the rest of her days. But here was a triumphal march nonetheless, marking the victory of order over chaos in the primitive society. Here was a parade celebrating the promise of enduring life for the tribe. In the spring of 1876, the word of war traveled like a north wind among the villages of the Sioux, freezing hearts and hardening the resolve of the chiefs. There was no road left to honor or survival than the warpath. Messengers shuttled like a strong stitch between the villages, weaving the war party together, bringing news of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and their plans to fight to defend the land. News that the wisdom of the leaders pointed to war. The bright days that followed were stained by ominous signals bearing word of the approaching enemy. Women trembled. So is it everywhere, in all places, in all times, when the thunderheads of war gather on the horizon. The signals spoke of a great war party, Cheyenne and Sioux already assembled. Young and old, men and women, sharpened their weapons and their hearts for the battle yet unborn. And the night before the village moved, they danced the Omaha by firelight, the traditional war dance of the Sioux Nation, designed to stir the blood to hatred and strengthen the spirit of valor, to gird both the warriors and their women in an armor of resolve for the critical struggle ahead, for the meeting with destiny at the Little Bighorn. And on June 25th, 1876, the combined forces of Crazy Horse met the United States Cavalry under General George Custer at the Little Bighorn River and destroyed them. The Sioux won the great battle, but lost their war with the westward progression. The warrior culture fell, as it had to fall, before the advance of that young nation bearing progress across a continent, its eyes on tomorrow. The Sioux, who withstood the shock of Custer's cavalry, fell before the meshing of gears and the forward flow of machinery. He fell to the Dakota earth, not before the carbine, but before the combine. Not war, but wheat was the tribe's undoing. Today, the Sioux live in an area bounded by the Black Hills of South Dakota, fringed by the sun-blasted Badlands, and along the serpentine Missouri River, named him. The old places, a stranger in his own home, and he lives in the shadow of an ideal. The people have fallen out of the sunlight of freedom and into the shadows, and there is pathos in their plight. For these are the deep shadows of poverty, inertia, and bewilderment. The reservation lands where we have confined them are bleak and unyielding, and these descendants of a once proud migratory people, wielders of the lance, have never taken to the plow. They are restless, unhappy, constantly seeking a place in the sun. Today, at every fair and carnival from Sioux City to the Black Hills, the people can be found drawn by the color and excitement which go to the heart of their past and contrast so sharply with the drabness of their present. Even the Sundance, once their greatest religious expression, is placed on display, although watered down to a mockery of its former self. Once, this dance was incredibly cruel, a grim ballet based on torture, frightful and fear-inspiring. But the old religion is dead, the old gods prostrate, and not even the blasts of those weird whistles can awaken them. And at these carnivals, the drums of the war dance sound again. Pathetic, the plight of the fallen eagle who drags his feathers in the dust. Pathetic, the plight of a people whose world came to an end out of reasons beyond their understanding or control, and who find the bread and circuses of secular America in its place, find a world brightly painted and spinning like a top, but every bit as and with as little future in it. Caught in the web of our time are the descendants of the people who on 3 occasions annihilated American military forces, the only adversary ever able to accomplish the feat. Yes, and a grudging paternal hand, barren, unyielding land, the feathers of his father, and carnivals for his children, these we have given the Sioux in exchange for his way of life and his earth. These we have given him, and one thing more. We have given him God and his church, brought substance to the void, light to the shadows, hope to the hopeless. For the Episcopal Church has for over 3/4 of a century led the way in providing the Sioux with the way of life, the way of thought, the way of worship he needs and wants so desperately. It is the Church which, through education and evangelism, is laboring to mark the trail for a people lost and wandering through the wilderness of our time. It is the Church which is endeavoring to repay a people whom our nation has beaten and robbed with the one thing we possess that can balance our account. The Church has from the beginning assumed the position of leadership in the reconstruction of the spirit of the Sioux people. Its work is as broad as it is deep, extending across the Dakota Prairie, over the barren and lonely reservation lands that stretch from Pine Ridge to Rosebud to Standing Rock to Santee. Its priests and catechists and Indian lay readers travel far afield to minister to their flocks. In this representative Sioux Christian home, one discerns the difference that God's light can make in the lives of people lost. Yes, there is isolation, there is life imprisonment to a land unfit for cultivation, there is poverty in its deepest, grimmest sense. But in spite of this, one can discern that the darkness has been dispersed. There is a difference in their dress, in the look in their eyes, the sureness of their speech. One is arrested by the new meaning they have found in life through the Church, the new faith they possess in themselves and in the future. The Church's trail winds on across the lives of the people, drawing them into the tight pattern of its concern. In this home, a whole family has been encouraged to draw upon the rich resources of their heritage, that beauty too might reside, as it did for their grandparents, in the austere fabric of their lives. such encouragement has led not only to aesthetic rewards, but to a greater earning power and a higher standard of living. The trail of the church winds on, and it plants the seeds of hope at myriad places along the way. Humble churches visited by priests, but served by lay readers, by men named Red Cloud and Whirlwind Warrior, American Horse and Young Eagle. And wherever that trail winds, wherever the seeds are planted, one discerns the flowering of Christian character, the presence of love in life. From Oglala to Santee, from Rapid City to Rosebud, one finds not only the roots of spiritual reconstruction, but the promise of a harvest. One finds a people taking to the trail that will lead them out of the prostrate past, out of the pitiful present, a trail that winds onward toward a decent and dignified tomorrow. The most important event in the year to the Sioux people is the Niobrara convocation, the occasion on which church members gather to rededicate themselves to God, to his church, and to the advancement of his Sioux children. The people await it all year, travel great distances to reach it, measure their lives by the number of convocations they've witnessed. The man who symbolizes the concern of our church for the Indian addressed them, spoke to them out of the infinite source of love to which he has access through Christ. And his words were interpreted by the man whose father had been the first member of the Sioux people to be ordained by the Episcopal Church. Then, at this 79th annual convocation, they prayed, red men and white together, prayed not for the Sioux, but for the troubled world, prayed that all men everywhere might learn to live together as brothers and in peace. The Niobrara convocation closes with sunset prayers, and that moment in the year is the richest the Sioux people know today, for it tells them that the old way of faith through fear has perished, and in its place has come faith through love. It is a moment when a people receive insight into God's design. God's design? The man in the shadow of Mount Rushmore had received it too, but recently at his cathedral in Sioux Falls. It had been one of the most soul-satisfying experiences of a long and abundant career in the service of the church and in the service of the Sioux. Indeed, it had been as an answer dispatched by God to assuage the concern of his children, concern for the tomorrow the Sioux would know. It was an ordination service. Fine young Sioux became priests of the Episcopal Church. Christian leadership. This the Sioux require most of all, and this they are eminently capable of assuming. These men were trained and educated by the church, and they will in turn lead others to leadership. Thus does the church help the Sioux to help themselves. But through this ordination, not only would the Sioux advance, so would the nation that conquered him, and the world. Indeed, so would all mankind advance by this act in the eyes of him whose words have transcended the ages. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. At Camp Remington in the Indian summer of his life, the Bishop of South Dakota ponders the problem of the Sioux, a manifestation of a deeper disease, man's inhumanity to man. The chapel at Camp Remington is at the center of the area so that all who meditate there may visit it in search of the answer they seek. Bishop Roberts, in his lifetime, had come to it more than any man. He loved the sign over the altar. The strength of the hills is his also. The strength of the hills is his also. His fall almost a century ago, the Sioux found the hand of the church extended to raise him up to full stature. Yes, for the Sioux, the strength of the hills is the church. So has it always been, so must it always be. For these are our brothers, and they labor and are heavy laden. The strength of the hills is his also. Lord, thy church has advanced, made great strides, but there is much to be done, and tomorrow is nearly upon us. Send us thy strength, that we may meet the debts of our forefathers to the Sioux, for until they are paid in full, there is sickness in our souls. Lord, make of us a people who are dedicated in act as well as in principle to the preservation of the dignity of man.